A snowstorm can silence a whole town, but not a little girl's cry for help. She knocked on a stranger's door, holding nothing but a dog, a heartbeat of courage, and the hope that maybe God still listens. The night was a white roar. Snow slashed sideways across the abandoned mining town, coating the crooked roofs and frozen tracks that once carried ore and hope alike. The wind howled through every rusted hinge and half-broken sign, a choir of ghosts rehearsing their grief. Through that storm ran Lily Parker, just 8 years old and already too familiar with fear. Her scarf, once pink, now clung stiff to her neck, the fabric crusted with ice. She stumbled often, but never stopped, one hand gripping the collar of her dog, Ranger, a German shepherd whose muscles rippled under a thick coat of black and tan. He was young, barely 3, yet his instincts were old as loyalty itself. Every few steps, he turned his head back to check on her, amber eyes sharp, breath steaming in the dark. Behind them, the flicker of a broken streetlight cast long, frantic shadows. Somewhere beyond that light, a man's voice had shouted, coarse, slurred, full of whiskey and rage. It was a voice Lily had known since her mother met Roy Dalton. Roy had the build of a man who had worked once and stopped too soon, thick shoulders, gone to fat, and a neck red from drink and temper. His beard grew unevenly, as if even the hair refused to stay with him. In the beginning, he had been kind in small ways, bringing her mother flowers stolen from the diner's window, whistling as he fixed the sink that never really leaked. But the kindness had a clock inside it, ticking down to when the bottle opened. Tonight, the ticking stopped. When the shouting began, Lily had hidden under the bed, holding Ranger by the collar to stop him from barking. Then came the thud, the sharp crack, the silence. Her mother, Angela Parker, had fallen. Angela was a woman faded by too many winters. Her once dark hair hung in tangled ribbons, her frame thin from factory meals and skipped lunches. Her skin, pale and bruised at the jaw, seemed to carry the shadow of every bad year. Yet, even in her worst days, her voice could soften like melted snow when she spoke to Lily, a voice that still believed in bedtime stories and the smell of cinnamon bread. But tonight, that voice didn't answer. Ranger had growled low, muscles trembling, ready to fight, but Lily grabbed his snout and whispered, "No, we have to get help." Her small body shook with a resolve that didn't belong to a child. She pulled on her coat, too large, missing a button, and slipped into the storm with Ranger pressed against her leg. They crossed alleys where drunks slept under tarps, and yards where the fences leaned like tired old men. The snow soaked through Lily's shoes, turning her toes numb, but Ranger guided her, nose low to the wind, leading toward a faint orange light through the white haze. That light belonged to Caleb Morgan. Caleb's house stood alone on the edge of town, half workshop, half refuge. The man himself was built like the cabins he repaired, broad, weathered, and silent. His hair, once black, now held more gray than not, cut short around a face etched with old regret. A jagged scar traced his right cheek, a relic from a mining accident 10 years earlier, the same accident that had taken his younger brother. Since then, Caleb had spoken less and drank only coffee, never whiskey. He lived with tools, with engines that coughed back to life under his careful hands, and with the kind of solitude that begins as choice and ends as punishment. When the knocking came, frantic, uneven, human, he was sharpening a chisel by the stove. The sound made him still. Visitors did not come here after dark, not in a storm like this. He set the tool aside, rose from his chair, and listened. The knock came again, softer this time, followed by a muffled voice. "Please, please, sir." Caleb opened the door. Snow burst inward, and there she was, a child, drenched, trembling, a thin halo of golden hair whipped across her face. The dog beside her barked once, deep and commanding, as if to announce her presence. Caleb blinked down at her. "Good Lord," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "What are you doing out here?" Lily's lips were blue. Her words stumbled between chattering teeth. "It's my mama! She's hurt! She can't move!" For a moment, the storm seemed to hush around them. Caleb knelt, his heavy frame lowering slowly so he didn't frighten her. "Where is she?" "In our room, near the diner. She stopped, throat tightening. "Roy hurt her." The name twisted in Caleb's mind. He knew the man. Everyone did. A mean drunk with a short fuse and long debts. Caleb rose, fetched his coat and lantern, and said only, "Show me." Ranger barked once as if to agree. They trudged through the snow together, a giant, a child, and a dog, the storm clawing at their backs. Caleb's long strides left deep tracks that Lily tried to match, while Ranger darted ahead, nose low, cutting a path. The wind screamed across the open lots, throwing needles of ice against their faces. When they reached the building, a decayed boarding house leaning under the weight of years, the door hung half open, creaking. Inside, the single bulb flickered. Angela lay slumped on the floor near the bed, her skin ghostly against the dark stain of blood on the wooden boards. Caleb knelt beside her, checked her pulse, and exhaled in quiet relief when it fluttered weakly. She's alive. Lily dropped to her knees, clutching her mother's hand. Ranger paced in circles, whining low, his tail down but eyes alert. Caleb noticed the dog's composure, not panic, but purpose. And for a fleeting second, he felt something strange, respect. "Help me lift her," he said. He wrapped Angela in a blanket, lifted her effortlessly, and carried her through the storm. Lily followed close, and Ranger trotted behind, ever watchful. The truck's headlights cut through the snow like thin swords of light. In the cab, Angela stirred once, whispering a name that wasn't Caleb's. He didn't ask who, he only drove. When they reached his workshop, the dog jumped down first, circling to guard them, as Caleb carried Angela inside. The cabin's warmth rushed to meet them. Lily stood shivering by the door, her small frame haloed by the flickering light of the stove. Caleb laid Angela on the couch, covered her with an old quilt, and turned to the child. "She'll be all right," he said, not entirely sure if he believed it. Ranger came to sit beside Lily, pressing his head against her hip. She bent and hugged him tight. "We did it," she whispered, half to him, half to herself. Outside, the wind screamed harder, shaking the windows until frost fell from the panes. Caleb glanced toward the door and saw something pinned there, a dark scrap of paper, flapping in the draft. He stepped closer, peeled it loose, and frowned. 3 words scrawled in black ink, crooked and angry. "You'll regret this." The storm swallowed the sound of his exhale. Ranger's ears lifted, a low growl building in his chest. Caleb's hand tightened around the note. Somewhere beyond the walls, the night seemed to breathe, watching. And for the first time in years, Caleb Morgan locked his door from the inside. The storm had softened by dawn, leaving behind a world coated in white silence. The roof of Caleb Morgan's cabin crackled under the slow melt, drops of water falling in rhythm onto the tin basin below the stove. Inside, the air smelled of ash, wet wool, and something faintly metallic, like the taste of a night survived. Caleb sat in the corner chair, his broad shoulders hunched forward, the scar along his cheek catching the glow of the rekindled fire. He hadn't slept. He rarely did when there was someone else under his roof. Solitude had its habits, and company was an interruption, even when it came with purpose. On the couch, Angela Parker stirred. Her breathing came shallow, each inhale raspy like dry leaves. Fever had painted her cheeks with patches of red that didn't belong there. Caleb noticed the way her hands trembled when she tried to lift them, thin and bruised, nails broken from work and struggle. Her eyelids fluttered open, green eyes dulled by exhaustion, and for a moment she didn't recognize where she was. "Lily," she rasped. Lily appeared from the small cot by the stove, wrapped in Caleb's old wool blanket, her blonde hair tangled into uneven strands. She ran to her mother's side, clutching her hand. "You're okay, Mama. You're safe." Angela's lips quivered as if she wanted to believe it, but couldn't yet. Then, a sudden wheeze cut through her breath, sharp, frightening. She gasped, eyes wide. Caleb moved quickly, the same reflex that had saved men from cave-ins and broken pulleys. "She's choking on air," he muttered, voice steady but tense. Before he could search for help, Ranger, the German shepherd, rose from his spot near the door. The dog's ears pricked, and he trotted to Angela's torn coat that hung drying by the stove. He sniffed, nudged a pocket, and carefully pulled out something small, an inhaler, dented but intact. Carrying it in his mouth, he dropped it into Caleb's large, calloused hand. Caleb blinked, a hint of surprise crossing his hardened features. "Smart dog," he murmured. Lily smiled through her worry. "He always knows," she whispered, voice trembling. Caleb guided Angela's hand to the inhaler, watching as her breath slowed, steadied, and finally softened. When calm returned, silence stretched between them again. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, and inside, the fire popped like tiny gunshots. Caleb rose, moving toward the shelf that served as his pantry, mostly cans and sacks of grain. "You both need to eat," he said, pulling down a small tin of lentils and another of salt. The kitchen corner of the cabin was clean but sparse: a single iron pot, a cracked plate, 2 spoons that didn't match. Caleb moved with the precision of a man used to doing without. He filled the pot with water from the barrel, lit the stove, and began to stir. His hands were large, rough from years of mechanical work. Yet his movements were careful, measured, almost tender. Lily watched him, curiosity cutting through her fear. "You cook?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said without looking up. "When no one else will." Ranger sat by her feet, tail brushing the floor in slow, patient strokes. When the smell of lentils filled the air, Lily whispered to the dog, "You first, Ranger. Quality control." The dog tilted his head, waiting for Caleb's permission like a soldier awaiting orders. Caleb, noticing the exchange, allowed himself a quiet chuckle, the first in a long time. Angela managed a weak smile. "You've got manners, don't you, big fella?" she whispered to the dog. When the soup was done, Caleb ladled it into 3 chipped bowls. He handed one to Angela, who took it with trembling hands. "It's not much," he said. "It's enough," she replied softly. Her voice held both gratitude and guilt. Lily blew gently on her spoon, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, before taking a sip. Caleb noticed the rhythm. "What's that you're counting?" She shrugged. "Mama taught me. When things get bad, you breathe slow and count to 4. Makes the hurt stay small." Caleb nodded, something tightening in his chest. He'd learned his own version of that lesson once, deep underground, when the air had been heavy with dust and fear. "It works," he said. The day passed quietly. Angela dozed between wakefulness and fever dreams, murmuring apologies to ghosts that only she could see. Lily helped where she could, fetching water, folding blankets, sweeping the corner floor, though there was little to sweep. Ranger kept his post by the door, occasionally rising to patrol the edges of the cabin as if daring the storm or anyone else to return. By afternoon, the wind died down, and the first voices of town crept in through the distance. Caleb stepped outside to fetch more wood and saw 2 men walking down the slushy road, their hats pulled low and their words carried by the cold. "Did you hear?" one said, his tone oily with gossip. "Old Caleb's taken in Roy Dalton's woman." The other snorted. "She's bad news, that one, and her kid. Always trouble follows folks like that." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd lived under the scrutiny of whispers before, after his brother's death, when townsfolk muttered he should have been the one crushed, not the younger man. Gossip had teeth, but it only hurt if you let it bite. Still, he felt the sting on Angela's behalf. That evening, as he split logs by the shed, a horse approached. The rider was Sheriff Maria Lopez, a woman in her mid-40s with a straight back and eyes as sharp as a drawn blade. Her skin was olive-toned, her black hair braided tight beneath her hat, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had fought twice as hard to be heard in a man's world. She dismounted with ease, dusting snow from her gloves. "Evening, Caleb," she said, words spreading. "You've got company?" He nodded once. "A woman and her kid, hurt bad. I didn't ask questions." Lopez sighed, her breath turning white in the air. "You never do you?" she said, not unkindly. "Listen, you should file a report. Roy Dalton's been a problem before, but you know how it goes. Papers take time, justice takes longer." Caleb's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered toward the cabin. "I'll handle it," he said. "Just don't handle it with your fists," Lopez replied, mounting her horse again. "The law's slow, but it's still the law." He watched her disappear into the gray dusk, her silhouette swallowed by falling snow. When he returned inside, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, carving shapes into a small block of wood with one of his old tools. Ranger lay beside her, chin on paws, watching with lazy devotion. Angela was awake, her color returning slowly. "Sheriff came by," Caleb said quietly. Angela's eyes flicked up, weary but calm. "They'll talk," she said. "They always do." "I know," he replied. "Let them." Outside, the wind shifted again, not as a storm, but as a whisper passing through the trees. Inside, the soup pot simmered low, filling the cabin with the scent of lentils and quiet resilience. Lily leaned against Ranger, her breathing steady, the rise and fall of a heart learning to trust the world again. Caleb looked at the three of them, the child, the woman, the dog, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, a feeling not yet named, but close to belonging. And then, from somewhere far down the road, came the faint echo of boots in snow, slow, heavy, deliberate. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Caleb froze, his hand tightening around the chisel on the table. The sound faded, swallowed by distance, but its meaning lingered like frost in the blood. The peace they'd built that day was thinner than the ice on the roof. The morning began with a fragile kind of quiet, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath before something shifts. Frost still clung to the tin roof of Caleb Morgan's cabin, catching the first thin rays of sun. The air smelled of cold iron and smoke from the dying fire. Caleb stepped outside with his usual caution, boots crunching on snow that had hardened overnight. The world, for a moment, seemed calm, until his eyes caught a flash of dull metal on the cabin door. A nail, driven deep into the wood, pinned a torn piece of paper that fluttered in the breeze. The letters were uneven, jagged, scrawled in a drunk man's hand. "Give her back." Caleb stood there, motionless, the morning wind tugging at his coat. His jaw tightened, and his fingers traced the cold edge of the note. He didn't need a name to know who had sent it. Behind him, Ranger, the German shepherd, padded silently from around the side of the cabin. His fur bristled, ears erect. The dog sniffed the air, then lowered his nose to the ground. Caleb watched as Ranger followed an invisible trail toward the gate, tail stiff. The dog stopped by the fence post and let out a low, warning growl. Caleb knelt beside him, scanning the snow. Faint boot prints, half filled by new frost, led away toward the main road, bigger than his own, heavy set, and staggered. Along the edges, the faint scent of cheap whiskey hung in the air. "Yeah," Caleb murmured, voice rough. "I smell him too." Inside, Lily Parker sat at the table, legs swinging above the floor. She was carving a small wooden figure, a horse this time, with a butter knife Caleb had dulled for her safety. Her blonde hair was tied in two uneven braids that made her look half mischief, half courage. When Caleb entered, she looked up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing for you to worry about yet," he said, hanging his coat. He didn't tell her about the note. No need to plant fear where it already bloomed too often. Angela, pale but stronger, was folding blankets by the stove. Her sleeves were rolled up, showing the bruises that had turned yellow and green. The light through the window painted her face in soft gold, and for the first time in days, there was color in her cheeks. "We can't stay here forever," she said quietly. "It isn't fair to you." Caleb didn't look at her. "Fair doesn't live out here. Safe does." Angela's lips pressed tight, her instinct to argue dimmed by gratitude she didn't know how to voice. She returned to her work in silence. Lily set down her carving knife. "Mama," she said softly, "you always tell me not to run from the dark. Turn on the light instead." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "If we go now, he'll find us again. He always does." Angela froze, the words cutting deeper than scolding ever could. Before she could respond, Ranger padded over, resting his massive head on her knee. His amber eyes lifted to hers, steady and understanding. Angela brushed a hand over his fur. The warmth there felt more real than any comfort she'd had in months. Caleb cleared his throat. "If you're staying," he said, "then everyone needs to know how to keep this place safe." He opened the back door and whistled low. Ranger trotted after him, tail swaying. Lily followed, curious. Out in the snow-dusted yard, Caleb crouched beside Ranger and made a quick hand motion. "Down," he said. The dog dropped instantly, chest pressed against the cold ground, eyes never leaving Caleb's hand. "Stay." Ranger froze. "Guard." The shepherd's ears pricked, muscles tightening in silent readiness. Caleb looked at Lily. "Your turn." The girl blinked, then mimicked his gestures. "Down. Say, guard." Her voice was small, uncertain, but Ranger obeyed, tail thumping once before going still. Caleb's brow lifted. "He listens to you," Lily grinned, proud. "He always does." Ranger seemed to understand the praise. He barked once, sharp and joyful, before returning to full attention. For the next hour, Caleb taught her the basics: hand signals, tones of command, how to make her voice low and firm even when afraid. Lily learned quickly, laughing when Ranger leaned close to nuzzle her mitten or followed her every step as if she were his captain. Angela stood by the doorway, watching. Her heart felt too large for her ribs. There was something healing in seeing her daughter learn to lead rather than hide, to trust rather than tremble. When Lily turned and waved, Angela smiled through the sting of tears. That afternoon, snow began to fall again, softly this time, like ash from an old fire. The family, because that's what they were beginning to resemble, walked the mile into town for Sunday service. The church stood at the edge of Main Street, a modest white structure with peeling paint and a bell that leaned slightly to one side. Inside, it was warm but hushed, the smell of candles and old pine mixing with perfume and gossip. As they entered, conversations paused, heads turned. Angela felt every gaze like a stone dropped in her stomach. She wore a plain gray shawl that hid the last of her bruises, but shame had its own color, one no fabric could disguise. Caleb walked behind her, silent, tall as a mountain in his worn coat. His presence drew whispers too, but for different reasons. Some saw him as a brute, others as a man too proud to need anyone. Now, seeing him with Angela and Lily, the whispers sharpened into blades. They took a seat near the back. Lily sat between her mother and Caleb, her feet not reaching the floor. Ranger lay quietly outside the door, loyal even beyond walls. When the sermon ended, people lingered near the pews, pretending to tidy hymn books just to steal glances. One woman broke the hush, a tall, thin widow named Mrs. Prudence Calloway, wrapped in black fur though the church was warm. Her mouth was narrow as a pencil line, and her hair, white and rigid, framed a face built for disapproval. She approached Angela with a smile that never reached her eyes. "My dear," she said, her tone syrupy, "I do hope you're recovering. But perhaps it would be better for you, and the gentleman here, if you sought kin elsewhere. Folks might misunderstand." Angela froze, words catching in her throat. The heat of humiliation crept up her neck. Lily looked up at the woman, eyes bright with something sharper than fear. "Ma'am," she said politely, "I think God likes honest people more than ones who spread stories." The church went still. Then, from the open doorway, came a sudden, loud sneeze. Ranger's, perfectly timed. A few chuckles escaped, soft at first, then louder. Even the Reverend coughed to hide a smile. Mrs. Calloway's painted lips tightened. She muttered something about children today and swept away in a rustle of fur. Angela's tension broke into a trembling laugh she hadn't felt in years. Caleb's eyes met hers briefly, just a flicker, but it said enough. For that moment, they weren't fugitives or outcasts. They were simply people trying to stand upright in a crooked world. When the service ended, they stepped outside. The snow had stopped, sunlight glinting off the white rooftops. Lily ran ahead to hug Ranger, who wagged his tail like he had saved the world. Caleb turned to see Angela watching the horizon, her face soft, but her eyes troubled. "Thinking about leaving again?" he asked quietly. Angela shook her head. "Thinking about staying and what it will cost." Caleb looked toward the distant tree line, where shadows moved too easily for comfort. "Everything worth keeping costs something," he said. And just then, as they began the walk home, the wind picked up again. Caleb's gaze fell to the side of the church steps. There, nailed into the wood, another scrap of paper. This one read, "You've been warned." He didn't show it to Angela, not yet. Ranger, however, caught the faint scent of whiskey again and growled low, the sound vibrating through the air like thunder waiting its turn. The storm began long before the first flake of snow hit the ground. It started in the clouds, black, swollen, rolling like the bellies of beasts. The air grew sharp, electric, heavy with the promise of something terrible. By nightfall, the wind screamed through the valley like 1,000 unseen voices, and the lights in Caleb Morgan's cabin flickered in uneasy rhythm. Inside, the room was warm but tense. The fire in the stove pulsed low, a tired heartbeat in the dark. Caleb sat by the table, sharpening his knife with deliberate, slow strokes, each scrape echoing against the tin roof. His jaw was tight, the muscles along his neck twitching beneath his grizzled stubble. He had felt this kind of stillness before, years ago, deep underground, when a cave began to tremble before it collapsed. It wasn't silence, it was warning. Across the room, Angela Parker was mending one of Lily's mittens, her fingers moving carefully despite the faint tremor in her hands. Her face looked softer tonight, less haunted, though the circles beneath her eyes still told the story of sleepless years. Lily, small and earnest, sat cross-legged on the rug with Ranger beside her, brushing the dog's thick fur with an old comb. Ranger tolerated the grooming like a soldier enduring a ceremony, dignified, stoic, patient. "Hold still, Ranger," Lily whispered. "You have to look sharp for tomorrow." Caleb glanced over. "Tomorrow?" "Sunday again," she said, smiling. "Ranger needs to look respectable for church." A rare chuckle escaped him. "He already behaves better than most folks in that church." Angela almost smiled, but her fingers paused mid-stitch. The wind outside had shifted, an ugly, dragging sound like boots through slush. Ranger's ears twitched. Then came the faint crunch of snow, steady, heavy, deliberate. Caleb set the knife down, his expression changing from calm to iron. He rose silently and walked to the window. The darkness outside was nearly solid, but through it, the dim glow of a lantern swayed. Not one, three, moving closer. Ranger stood, body rigid, a low growl forming deep in his chest. The hair along his spine bristled. His amber eyes caught the flickering light, turning gold and fierce. Caleb spoke quietly. "Angela, take Lily to the back room. Bolt the door." Angela hesitated. "Caleb, go," he said. The word wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that brooked no argument. As Angela hurried Lily away, Caleb reached for the shotgun mounted above the fireplace. He checked it, loaded, but held it low. The knock came then, hard enough to rattle the hinges. "Open up, Morgan," a voice slurred through the storm. "You got something that's mine." Caleb knew that voice. Roy Dalton. Roy was broader than Caleb, but softer. A man who had built strength only to let it rot under liquor. His beard hung in uneven patches, his breath usually stinking of whiskey and cheap tobacco. His face was the kind that once might have been handsome before rage carved it into ruin. The town called him unlucky, but luck had nothing to do with what he'd become. Caleb stepped to the door but didn't open it. "She's not yours, Roy." His voice was steady, even calm. "Like hell she ain't," Roy roared. "You think you can steal a man's wife and hide her out here like some damn saint?" "I didn't steal her," Caleb said. "You lost her." The answer seemed to hit harder than any weapon. Silence, then the sound of snow crunching closer, followed by the metallic clink of a can being uncapped. Caleb's stomach turned cold. He knew that sound. Gasoline. "Don't do this," Caleb called, voice lower now, tighter. Roy laughed, a sound too wild to belong to laughter. "You think you're better than me? Let's see what God thinks when your house burns down." Before Caleb could move, Ranger launched forward, barking so fiercely that the door trembled with the sound. The dog's growl rose into the howl of the wind, the two sounds twisting together until it was impossible to tell where storm ended and fury began. A flash of light. Someone outside had struck a match. Caleb swung the door open just as Roy's arm cocked back to throw the gasoline can. Ranger burst through the opening like lightning, a streak of black and tan muscle. He slammed into Roy's arm, jaws snapping onto the metal can. The match fell uselessly into the snow, hissing out in an instant. Gas splashed across the ground, but the spark never came. "Get him off!" one of the men shouted. A tall, wiry figure named Hank Brill, who worked nights at the rail yard. His face was long, with sharp cheekbones and nervous eyes that darted like mice. He was the kind of man who followed loud voices because his own was too small to matter. The other man, Tommy Reeves, was younger, barely 20, with a round face and a poorly grown beard. He looked scared already, breath coming out in visible clouds. "Roy, this ain't right," he muttered. "Shut up and grab her," Roy shouted, trying to shake free as Ranger snarled, teeth clamped tight. Inside the cabin, Lily heard the shouting. She turned to Angela, her heart pounding. "Mama, the signal!" Angela's eyes widened. "No, Lily!" But Lily was already moving. She ran to the back door, opened it just enough to whistle, a sharp two-note sound that sliced through the wind. Ranger's ears twitched. Instantly, he released Roy and turned toward the side of the cabin where Hank was trying to slip through the kitchen window. The dog hit him mid-step, knocking the man backward into the snow. Hank screamed, his hat flying off, as Ranger pinned his arm with surgical precision. Not tearing, just holding, growling deep in his throat. Caleb stepped forward, shotgun raised, not at Roy, but the air between them. "Enough," he said. Roy stood panting, his coat soaked, eyes wild. He looked less like a man now, more like a beast, cornered by its own anger. "You can't keep her from me," he spat. Caleb took one slow step forward. "She belongs to herself, Roy. That's the part you never understood." For a long second, the only sound was the wind and the ragged breathing of men who'd run out of courage. Then came a voice from behind, the unmistakable command of Sheriff Maria Lopez. "Put the weapon down, Dalton!" Roy froze. Flashlights cut through the dark as Lopez and two deputies appeared through the storm. The sheriff's face was calm, but her hand was steady on her holster. "Step back, Caleb," she said firmly. "We'll take it from here." Roy turned, rage dissolving into something closer to fear. "You got no right." "I've got every right," Lopez interrupted. "And 3 witnesses, counting the dog." Ranger gave a short bark, as if confirming the statement. It was then that Caleb noticed a small figure standing behind Lopez, Mrs. Prudence Calloway, the same old widow from the church, her fur coat dusted with snow. She looked smaller now, less severe. "I called her," she said simply. "Someone had to." Roy's defiance cracked. He let the can drop, sinking to his knees as the deputies closed in. When it was over, Lopez tipped her hat toward Caleb. "You did right," she said. "You didn't pull the trigger." Caleb looked at Angela, who stood in the doorway holding Lily close. Her eyes met his, shimmering with gratitude and something softer. "Didn't need to," he said quietly. The storm already passed. But outside, the wind still moaned, carrying with it the echoes of everything broken that might yet return. Ranger stood in the snow, chest heaving, watching as the sheriff's car lights faded into the distance. His fur was wet, his breath heavy, but his eyes were proud, amber flames burning against the white night. And as the last flake fell, he lifted his head and barked once more, not in warning, but in victory. Winter loosened its grip on the valley, as if exhaling after a long, bitter argument. Snow still lingered in shadows and gullies, but sunlight finally dared to touch the roofs again. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and soot, of something ending and beginning all at once. For the first time in months, the town of Coldridge felt less like a wound and more like a scar healing in slow, patient silence. Inside his small cabin, Caleb Morgan sat at the table with a stack of papers that looked far too official for the room they occupied. He rubbed the back of his neck and squinted at a paragraph written in stiff government language. "Application for protective housing assistance," it read at the top. Below it, Angela Parker's name was written in careful, shaking letters. Caleb's handwriting filled most of the rest. His letters were blocky, uneven, but determined, like a man who never learned the art of fine things but understood the value of steady effort. "Feels like I'm knitting a blanket out of words," he muttered. Across from him, Angela laughed softly, her hair brushed and tied back now, the color of dark chestnuts under the light. "A blanket we'll need," she said, gently smoothing one of the pages. The bruises on her arms had faded to the color of tea stains, nearly gone, but never forgotten. Ranger lay near the door, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but always listening. His fur had grown glossier from regular meals and the occasional brushing Lily insisted on each evening. The old scar on his flank, earned in some forgotten fight before all this, had healed into a pale patch that caught the light when he stretched. He looked older than his 3 years, wiser in the way only dogs and soldiers ever look. Lily burst in from outside, cheeks pink from the chill, a bundle of joy wrapped in mismatched mittens. "Sheriff Lopez says the judge signed it," she shouted before catching her breath. "Roy can't come near us anymore. Not ever." Angela froze, the words landing slow and heavy. Then she smiled, small but real. "Is it done?" "It's done," Lily said. Caleb leaned back, a deep breath leaving his chest. "Then that's the first good law I've seen in years." The news traveled through the town like sunlight through dirty glass. Hesitant at first, then undeniable. Sheriff Maria Lopez, true to her word, had stood firm at the hearing, her voice level and unflinching. She'd grown up in a rough border town herself, she once told Caleb, knew how fear could trap good people in bad places. When she came by that morning to deliver the paperwork, her uniform was crisp, her dark braid tucked neatly under her hat, but her eyes softened as she handed Angela the envelope. "It's over," she said simply. "Now you get to start." Angela whispered a thank you that caught in her throat. Lopez only nodded and touched the brim of her hat before turning away into the cold. Weeks passed. The storm stopped. The town remembered how to smile again, or at least how to pretend without bitterness. At the diner, old Mrs. Pratt, a heavy-set woman with silver hair piled like frosting, began setting aside extra cornbread for Lily, by accident. At the repair shop, a pair of local men, both quiet, both once suspicious of Caleb, dropped off cans of blue paint. "Roof's rustin'," one of them said without meeting his eyes. "Figured you could use this." Even Mrs. Prudence Calloway, the church widow, offered a thin smile when she saw Angela in town. She still spoke too loudly, still smelled faintly of lavender and judgment. But her tone had softened. "You've been brave," she said one morning. "The Lord notices such things." Angela didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she just nodded. Ranger had become something of a local celebrity. Every morning he walked Lily to school, trotting beside her like a soldier escorting royalty. When they reached the gate, he sat proudly, tail sweeping the ground, and watched until she disappeared inside. The teacher, Miss Hannah Green, a young woman with auburn curls and a soft southern accent, adored him. "Your dog's got better manners than half my students," she told Caleb once, laughing. Lily adjusted quickly to school life. She had her mother's quiet eyes, but her own kind of brightness, sharp, curious, a little mischievous. When other children asked about the scar on Ranger's side, she'd say, "That's where he keeps his bravery." And they'd all gasp as if it were magic. Angela, too, found her footing. With Sheriff Lopez's help, she secured a part-time job at the Coldridge Public Library, a small brick building that smelled of dust, coffee, and old paper. The librarian, Mr. Hal Bennett, was a man in his late 50s with a kind face and an awkward gait, the result of a bad leg from a construction accident years back. His hair was more gone than gray, and his sweaters were always one size too large. He spoke softly, almost apologetically, but had a dry humor that surprised anyone who listened long enough. "You're the new one Lopez sent, huh?" he said on her first day. "Good. I need someone who can tell the difference between a romance novel and a repair manual." Last kid I hired thought they both fixed something. Angela laughed, a sound she hadn't made easily in years, and the library suddenly felt warmer. She spent her hours cataloging, mending torn pages, breathing in the scent of renewal. She liked that smell. It didn't sting like whiskey or sweat. It smelled clean, like tomorrow. At home, evenings became ritual. Lily reading stories aloud, Caleb tinkering with an old radio, Ranger curled by the fire, occasionally lifting his head when a familiar phrase caught his ear. The cabin, once filled with echoes of loneliness, now hummed with quiet conversation and the clatter of daily life. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was one of those rare, spring days when the air held warmth without threat, and the snowmelt sang in the gutters. Caleb was on the porch, sanding a piece of wood for a new chair, when Angela stepped outside with 2 mugs of coffee. Lily was in the yard, throwing sticks for Ranger, who fetched each one with unshakable dignity, as if this too were noble work. Caleb took the cup, hesitated, and finally said, "I've been thinking." Angela arched an eyebrow, half amused. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled faintly. "About you two, about this place. I could use help fixing the roof. Long term, I mean. Maybe you would consider staying, not just for now." Angela stared at him, the wind brushing strands of hair against her cheek. There was no grand speech in her eyes, just the quiet understanding of someone who'd been waiting to exhale. "Caleb," she said softly, "I think we already are." Lily, overhearing, dropped the stick she was holding and squealed, "Does that mean we're a real family?" Before either adult could answer, Ranger trotted over carrying his leash, his favorite, worn leather with the brass clip polished from use. He set it down at their feet, tail wagging, and looked from one to the other expectantly. Angela laughed through tears, Lily clapped her hands, and Caleb bent down, picking up the leash. "Guess he's making it official," he said. That night, paperwork and promises turned into something simpler, home. A few weeks later, under the pale blush of early dawn, the 3 of them stood outside the newly painted blue cabin. The social worker, a young woman named Claire Matthews, slim with kind eyes and a clipboard she clutched like a shield, smiled as she handed over the last of the documents. "It's official," she said. "The Morgans, all 3. Angela's hands shook as she signed her name beside Caleb's. Lily drew a small heart under hers. Ranger sat beside them, tail flicking against the steps, head tilted toward the rising sun. As Claire drove away, the world seemed to hold still. The air was clear, full of the scent of melting snow and pine sap. The roof gleamed under the new coat of paint, blue as forgiveness. Lily leaned into Angela's side and whispered, "What do we call this place now?" Caleb looked toward the horizon where gold met white and said, "Home." Ranger lifted his head and let out a low, soft howl. Not sorrowful, not warning, but something between joy and belonging. It rolled across the fields like a prayer, carrying three small words only hearts could translate: freedom, kindness, home. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or light from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the shape of a little girl who refuses to give up, a tired man who chooses kindness over pride, and a loyal dog whose heart beats braver than most men's. When Lily knocked on Caleb's door that frozen night, she wasn't just seeking shelter. She was bringing hope to a soul that had forgotten warmth. And maybe that's what God does best. He sends us to one another so His love can wear human hands and fur and laughter again. If you believe kindness still has power in this world, if you've ever seen a small miracle hiding inside an ordinary day, leave a comment below and share this story. So someone else might remember that faith is never truly lost, only waiting to be found again. And before you go, say a little prayer, not just for Lily, Angela, Caleb, and Ranger, but for everyone out there still searching for a safe door to knock on. May God bless you and keep your home warm. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. So, together we can keep spreading the small miracles that still live among us.